Hey, this is Wayne Barraclough. I just wanted to put out a quick orientation for somebody who's used to working on BTS systems in cell sites. If you're coming from the macro world and going into DAS, um, there's really not a lot of new concepts. It's just you have this other fiber DAS system that you're not familiar with. You're used to these REUs going straight to antennas. So basically, the flow of the whole thing. You're starting at a MITSO, your mobile switching office, and you're running backhaul circuit out usually through a wireline provider. Um, Usually, they're providing it through Sienna. There may be other makes, but basically, they have some kind of a switch or a router. This may be off-site, feeding into a fiber box for you to plug into. It may be it may be in another room in a large venue. It may be it may be in the same room. It may be in the same rack as your router, your router or switch that runs your basebands. So you got fiber to your basebands. Your basebands are being fed off GPS. Um, you need to be mindful that you may not have just Verizon or just AT&T. There may be Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile may all have their own systems. So you may have a system. You may have two or three systems in the same room, BTS systems. You need to be mindful if you're working on those GPS that there isn't a splitter somewhere here that feeds multiple carriers. You don't want to go taking this off for Verizon, let's say, and then AT&T gets dropped. Um, uh, you may see fiber boxes. There may be a GPS over fiber solution. Let's say the roof is let's see the roof that this GPS on is 1,000 feet away. You may have a GPS receiver and transmitter box and fiber. Um, but other than that, you usually have just your same basic BTS system. You got a SIAD feeding a baseband, feeding RRUs, and instead of going to an antenna on a tower, you're now feeding into ODAS. You're going into a DAS interface unit usually. Um, there may not be a DAS interface unit. There may be combiners and attenuators. Um, but a lot of times, what we're using, we're going into a box that has some dials on it. It would be a black Westel or gray CCI, or there's other makes, but there'll be dials on here to dial power up and down to meet the specs coming into the POI, or to balance out different radios on the same BTS, or to balance out different wireless carriers. Your DAS system will take on different forms, but usually your fiber DAS has these basic components. You got some kind of a POI, some kind of point of interface, then you're combining the signals, and then you're converting them from RF on coax from RF to fiber and feeding these DAS remotes. The DAS remotes each DAS remote feeds in a system of antennas. Might be one antenna, might be 15 antennas. It depends on the design. Um, Now, that's not to say there's not differences in these systems. You may be looking at this and going, "Well, why am I going to fiber and converting from fiber to RF and then back to fiber again and then back to RF?" You don't have to do that. Some systems, let's say this is a 10-story building, and you might have an RRU. You might eliminate this entire thing and put this RRU on the eighth floor and the fifth floor and the second floor. Um, you have some DAS remotes. They're small remotes fed by Cat 6 that have an internal antenna. So instead of seeing a whole bunch of antennas and a few remotes, You'll have your own little baby DAS remote and antenna at each location. Looking at the power that's powering all these, if you have to work with the power, this is probably as complicated as it. This is probably as complicated as it gets. Right here, you have a neutral host. You'll have several BTS systems being powered. You'll have one DAS head end being powered. Um, so you got commercial power like FPNL, PPG, Duke Energy. Uh, they'll be feeding the main panel. A lot of times there'll be monitoring systems, depending on who's paying for the power. You may have a customer provided power, or you might have the customer charging the carrier for power. So you have a monitor. You have sub panel for each BTS system. If Verizon, AT&T, Sprint will all have their own sub panels feeding their power plant that's feeding their BTS, usually on DC. Your DAS head end usually fed on DC as well. You may have a volt server head end. It can be fed on DC. It could be fed on AC power through a UPS or directly from commercial power. But you've got a volt server transmitter and volt server receivers that receive, I think it's around 350 volts DC, that can be converted to DC or AC to feed DAS remotes or to feed RRUs. You can place an RRU here and feed it with a volt server remote. So that's your basic power system. That's your basic DAS system. I appreciate your time.